Tony Catalano was not the smartest man in the world, but he was loyal and hard-working. Mr. B had rewarded him repeatedly for his years of good service by giving him increasingly important assignments. This was his biggest assignment yet, and Big Tony was determined to prove that Mr. B's trust in him was justified. He studied the man's picture one more time, noticed the black Cadillac Escalade parked against the wall in the dimly lit garage. Tony knew that Arthur Clark owed the boss several $1,000,000 for helping Mr. B with some business deal. Tony had been instructed to remind Clark, the CEO of a major insurance company, that Mr. B didn't like it when Clark was a few days late on a payment. Give him a Big Tony growl, then threaten to shoot him in the knees if you have to, but by no means shoot him. These businessmen are a bunch of wimps, and he'll probably start crying and begging you not to hurt him. Remind him to call me tomorrow morning to discuss the late fee, Mr. B instructed Tony. Big Tony had studied Arthur Clark for a while. He knew that Clark was a well-groomed, handsome man who kept himself well-maintained, had wavy brown hair and dark brown eyes. He drives a 2022 Escalade and is usually the last to leave the building, which means it will be just the two of them in the parking lot. The penultimate executive had left 10 minutes earlier. Tony watched from behind the column as the door to the parking garage opened. He had to admit that Clark had made an impression on him. The man walking to his car looked about 10 years younger than he did in his photograph. Tony, 6'3" and 116 pounds, headed toward the second man, approaching him as he approached his car. Mr. B is not happy. You're late with the payment, Tony growled at the man who was looking at him incomprehensibly. Who? I don't know anyone named Mr. B, the man stammered, eyes wide. Tony growled again, pulling a gun from the waistband of his pants. Nice try, but unless you want to limp around for the rest of your life? Baba! The day was warm and Tony was sweating profusely. His right hand was covered in sweat and he began to lose his grip on the gun, waving it in front of the man. He quickly grabbed it again, but in doing so, he accidentally pulled the trigger. There was an almost deafening rumble in the garage. Tony watched in horror as blood rushed from the man's crotch. The man screamed and fell backwards. He wasn't dead, but Tony didn't have much faith in his chances of survival as he saw the blood continue to flow. That wasn't part of the plan, and Tony's specialty wasn't thinking on the fly. Tony didn't see an easy way out. In his state of extreme tension, all he could think of was something he had once heard in a pirate movie, Dead Men Tell No Tales. Given the circumstances, it seemed logical. He fired a second shot into the center, killing Clark, and walked away. Mr. B would not be happy about the mistake. Not being knowledgeable about cars as he drove out of the garage, he failed to notice that the Escalade was a 2020, not a 2022. As Gary Finchel lay dying, his cell phone rang several times before going to voicemail. 10 minutes later, it rang again. The dental office of Dr. Alan Siegel and Dr. Victor Washington was crowded Friday when two men, soon to identify themselves as police officers, approached the receptionist and asked to see Dr. Washington. 10 minutes later, a confused, red-faced Dr. Washington was let out in handcuffs. Victor Washington waited for his attorney to get to the police station before he agreed to be questioned. As I told you guys in my office, I barely knew Gary Finchel. He worked for the same company as my wife. I had met him at some of her office events, like Christmas parties and 4th of July barbecues. I don't think I've said more than 100 words to this guy since Tracy came to work for him 4 years ago, Victor said stiffly. What the F is going on? You do know that Mr. Finchel was murdered last night, right? The male officer asked. Yeah, Tracy seemed pretty upset when she found out last night. I think she went home from work. I'm guessing she's home today too, Victor said. The two police officers looked at each other and smiled. Victor and his attorney didn't miss that look. Where are you going with this? Victor's lawyer asked. The guy got his balls shot off, and you don't think we're going to leave his mistress's cuckolded boyfriend out of this, do you? Said the policewoman. Victor Washington almost fell out of his chair. Wait! What? He screamed. A cuckold? My wife? Lover? You mean you didn't know that your wife was having an affair with Gary Finchel and that you didn't shoot his privates off? I'm the Easter Bunny and she's the Tooth Fairy, said the policeman. You've already admitted that you have no alibi for the time of the murder, and you clearly have a motive, pal. Victor slumped in his seat. His lawyer whispered something in his ear. No, seriously, I didn't know, Victor said quietly. He stared dumbly at the two policemen. I didn't know, he said toward them. How did you guys know? The officers looked at each other again, but said nothing. You shot his balls off, Dr. Washington. We got it, the male police officer said. How did you know my wife was having an affair with Finchel? The dentist asked again. Your wife left 2 messages on his cell phone about meeting him around the time of the crime. She admitted to the affair when we pressed her hard. Lying in his prison bed that night, Victor had plenty of time to think about his situation. The police hadn't charged him yet, but they had 48 hours before he was due to be released. Victor was a smart man and knew that he should be worried about being charged with the murder of another. But the news that his wife had cheated on him more than overrode his worries about the murder charge. He and Tracy had been married for 26 years and had 2 grown children. Until a few hours ago, Victor had thought that he and Tracy were going hand in hand. But now, how long had this affair lasted, Victor wondered. Why had it started? How could he have missed it? On Sunday night, Victor was formally charged with murder and denied bail as a flight risk. He noted to himself that his wife hadn't tried to contact him since his arrest. Did she also think he had killed her lover? Victor thought back to Wednesday evening. As had been the custom for the past year, Tracy was supposedly going to dinner and conversation with her best friend Laura. Victor had never thought about it before because he trusted his wife. As usual, she got home around 8, but for some reason she seemed agitated and didn't hesitate to let him know it. I didn't see any dishes in the sink. Say, did you have Pop-Tarts for dinner again? For God's sake, Vic, you're not an invalid. I know you can cook, she hissed at him. Maybe I don't want to cook when I'm alone. I miss you, baby. I hate these bachelorette parties. Oh, come on, she said and stomped off to the shower. Tracy's impatience with her husband grew the longer her affair with Gary Finchel lasted. But it wasn't until recently that Victor noticed a problem between himself and his wife. Tracy loved her husband dearly and certainly wasn't looking for an affair when her friendship with her immediate boss, Finchel, began to grow. After working closely together for several years, Finchel began to see the possibility of something more in her when she began to open up about her personal life. At 5'5" tall, weighing 54 pounds, a shapely woman with straight, shoulder-length black hair, Tracy looked 10 years younger than her 48 years, but seemed very concerned as her 50th anniversary approached. Gary began to slowly feed her ego with compliments. Not that her husband didn't give her compliments, but Tracy seemed particularly pleased with the ones that came from another man. Finchel, married and with 2 children of his own, was very careful in his seduction of Tracy, and it was almost a year before he slept with the other man's wife. Although Finchel's tool was no bigger than her husband's, he proved to be more skillful, Tracy thought, completely dismissing the fact that part of her pleasure was due to the fact that Finchel was new to her, and the affair seemed very savory. Tracy and her partner usually met for sex once or twice a week. Several times a week they met for lunch and spent a lot of time in each other's company. Virtually everyone who worked in the office knew about their affair, including Arthur Clark. Victor instructed his attorney to do a financial check on Monday morning because he no longer trusted his wife. His children visited him in detention that morning and told him that the tabloids were making a big deal out of it. Cheating hubby shot nuts off wife's lover, read the headline on one of the papers his son Jared showed him, clearly implying that the dead man's intimate body parts had been shot off. Well, I have to give the headline writer credit for at least being a smart bastard, Victor said quietly. Not funny, Dad. You're in a lot of trouble here, and you're being smart, his daughter Dee whimpered. I'm sure it'll all work out, baby. I didn't kill him, I swear, Victor told his children. Mom seems to think I did. We spent the night at the house, and she spent most of the time with us calling you a murdering bastard. Said you couldn't accept that her boyfriend was a better man, a better lover, Jared said. I finally told her to shut up. Jared grinned, glaring at his father. He knew that under normal circumstances, Victor wouldn't have tolerated his son using abusive words toward his wife, but these were beyond normal circumstances. Victor grinned in response, causing Jared to breathe a sigh of relief. I appreciate you defending me, Victor said. When did you find out about Mom? His daughter asked. Only when I was arrested. I keep telling the cops that I didn't know, Victor said. I loved your mother, but there's no way I'd go to jail over her being a whore. But I wish I knew who killed that bastard, because I'd like to shake his hand. The kids looked at each other in utter amazement. They never thought their father would be honest with them. Of course, the children had also never thought their mother would be dishonest with them, but now there was no denying that she had been dishonest with both their father and them. She tried to cover up her infidelity by constantly accusing their father of killing Finchel. She repeatedly told anyone who would listen that the press was crucifying her for a small affair, while her husband, in her opinion, was being acquitted of murder. Yes, I slept with another man, but your father killed another man. All the damn press cares about is the sexual aspect, she complained to her children. Well, if your father did kill a man, it's because you had sex with him. It's all about sex, Jared snapped at her. When state police found a 9mm handgun with the decomposed remains of a large man upstate a few months later, they were immediately suspicious. 2 days afterward, ballistics testing of the gun showed a match to a high-profile case from this spring, a case the media dubbed cheating husband. It's not every day that a cuckolded husband shoots nuts off his wife's lover. The remains were identified as those of Tony Big Tony Catalano, a low-level mafia member of George Barrel's gang. After extensive double-checking, state and local police were unable to find any connection between Catalano and the man jailed for the murder of Gary Finchel, Dr. Victor Washington. The connection to the jilted husband case stirred the media again, and they joined the police in trying to find a connection between the mob and the insurance company. The police won the race, conclusively determining that Arthur Clark was the link, but it took a sharp-eyed video technician at one of the city's news stations to piece it all together. Robbie Comstock of KRNT News was looking at photos of the main players in both cases when he noticed the close physical resemblance between Gary Finchel and his boss, Clark. He then remembered that both men drove black Escalades, with Finchel's car being 2 years older. What if Big Tony shot Finchel by accident, mistaking him for Clark? Comstock asked the two investigating officers in an off-the-record meeting. What if Finchel getting his privates shot off turned out to be just a freak coincidence? Further investigation led police to believe the video technician's theory. Several insurance company employees noted that the office joked as if Finchel's grooming and choice of car were clearly disliked by his boss. George Barrel had been less than pleased with Big Tony when he'd reported that evening that his assignment had gone south and Clark was dead. The mob boss had always tried very hard to keep his legendary bad temper in check, but it hadn't always succeeded in his business. "I told you not to shoot, you fucking idiot! What didn't you understand?" Barrel bellowed at the cowardly man. "You shot him twice and killed him!" "I screwed up big time, Mr. B. I'm really, really sorry," Tony said remorsefully. "The gun started to slip out of my hand. I intercepted it and it went off. He was bleeding badly and I knew he was going to die. And I thought if I just left him there, he might talk. So I finished him off." Barrel thought for a few seconds before answering. "Have Andrew take you to our house on East 9th and sit with you for a few days until we figure out how to get you out of town for a while. He'll keep you out of sight and feed you well," Barrel said. "Thank you, Mr. B. I really appreciate it. I'm really sorry about what happened." "All right, move along, Tony," Barrel said, clapping the large man on the shoulder and leading him toward the door. Tony's fate was sealed when it was revealed that the victim was not Arthur Clark, but one of his employees. Clark had left the office for a doctor's appointment earlier that day. "This may not be the worst thing that could happen," Barrel told his chief assistant, Frankie Donatello. "It'll definitely show Mr. Clark that we're not to be trifled with. But hell, I always liked Tony, that big dumb goofball. You know what needs to be done." Donatello nodded and left the room. After Finchel's murder, Tracy's life went down the drain. She hadn't realized that her husband knew anything about her affair and was utterly shocked that her gentle, loving spouse could kill another man. She suddenly knew real fear, but was comforted by the fact that he had been arrested by the police and was being held without bail. While her children were devastated by Tracy's infidelity, she played up their father's murder of their lover to divert attention from the infidelity issue. It would have worked better if it hadn't been for the media digging up a story about a cuckold husband killing his wife's lover, making it fit for the front pages. Hell, you'd think I was the first woman in town to leave her husband, Tracy whined to her co-worker Liz over lunch one day, about 2 weeks after the murder. If you believe the damn press, I'm the second coming of the harlot of Babylon. Well, you have to admit it's not exactly usual for your jealous husband to shoot your lover's nuts off and kill him, Liz said with a giggle as she looked at Tracy's face. I'm sorry, she muttered quickly. Pretty much everyone here knew you two were tumbling around, but how serious is this, Tracy? Were you two in love with each other? You know, I loved Vic, but Gary and I were turning into someone, although I guess we'll never know what we could have become. I can't believe Victor could kill someone. I guess you never really know a person, huh? Tracy said. I guess not, Liz said quietly. The week before, Liz had been with Tracy and a few other co-workers at Gary's funeral. She had seen Gary's wife cast angry glances at Tracy several times and noticed that Tracy had lowered her eyes, but seemed to be crying quietly throughout the service. She knew that Tracy had to be a little concerned that Gary's widow might get out of hand. Thankfully, nothing scary happened. Tracy did her best to stay in the background, away from the widow. Having never been to prison, Victor couldn't believe how amazing it was to feel like a free man after more than 4 months in jail. In his head, he equated the feeling to the biggest high of his life. Oh shit, Lance, even the air is sweeter, I swear, he shouted in jubilation as he walked out of the jail with his attorney. The city's district attorney released Victor and dropped the charges against him when police determined that his wife's lover, Gary Finchel, had been shot and killed by another man, Big Tony Catalano. Lance Weatherman took his client to the house he had shared with his wife Tracy for the past 15 years. Tracy was at work as the time was barely past noon. He and Lance entered the house looking exactly as it had when he had last seen it, Victor thought. While Lance watched, Victor walked slowly through the entire house, loosely touching the walls, the furniture, even the knickknacks as a blind man would. God, how I miss this place, even knowing what I know now, Victor whispered. Victor walked over to his well-stocked liquor cabinet, knowing that Tracy never drank hard liquor, and the cabinet probably hadn't been touched since he'd been arrested. There were at least 25 bottles of liquor in various stages of fullness. The holiday calls for single malt, Victor said enthusiastically, pulling out a half-full bottle of 12-year-old Glenmorangie and pouring shots for Lance and himself. Thanks for your help, Lance. And thanks for being there for me when things were at rock bottom, he said. I know it wasn't just for the paycheck. He and Lance sipped their shot glasses in silence. Lance drummed his fingers on the manila folder on the table. Why do you think she didn't file for divorce while I was in jail? Victor asked. At first, probably because there was so much crap going on, especially with the media hype and everything. Then she probably just figured you'd make it out of jail on your own, Lance replied. The kids said that she was convinced that I killed her lover and that she hated me for it. So I guess I'm shocked that she hasn't done it yet, Victor said. When she gets home, she'll be shocked. Maybe with everything that's been going on, she'll change her perspective and want to stay with you. Gary's dead, the kids are mad at her, she's pretty much the real Stervella DeVille. As the saying goes, best of the worst, Lance said. Back at home, Tracy didn't recognize the car parked in her driveway. At first, she thought it was another reporter looking for an interview, but then she realized that whoever it was already inside her house. She dialed 911 and gave the dispatcher all the information. 2 minutes later, 2 uniformed police officers entered Washington's house, joined by Tracy. "Oh my God, what are you doing here?" she shouted to Victor, and both officers raised their guns. Both Victor and Lance raised their hands above their heads. "Stop, stop, stop! I live here. I'm Vic Washington. I was released from prison a few hours ago. The DA even apologized to me," Victor said. "He did. I'm his lawyer. He was cleared of all charges," Lance said. One of the police officers called and confirmed the statement. Tracy was shocked. "The asshole was just a victim in the poor schmuck's story, Tracy," Victor said. "He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Besides, why would I even go to jail over your shabby ass? You think too highly of yourself." Tracy lowered her head, blushing deeply. The 2 cops were about to leave when Lance asked them to witness something. He handed Tracy a manila envelope and told her that she had been served. "I don't think I want a divorce, Vic," Tracy muttered. I actually thought it was you who killed Gary, but since you didn't, maybe there's hope for us. Are you fucking delusional, woman? You cheated on me. Forget everything else. Forget the fact that your cheating cost me over 4 months in prison. 4 months! Victor screamed. You told the kids he was a better man, a better lover. Well, I don't want leftovers from Gary Finchell's table. Vic wasn't sure he could ever thank Alan Siegel, his business partner, and his wife Marilyn for the support they gave him during his unjust imprisonment and divorce. The Siegels visited Victor in prison at least once every 2 weeks, and Alan worked 50 and 60 hours a week taking Victor's patients while he was in prison. To get used to his life, Victor took a week off and then returned to work. He was amazed at how well he was treated by people, many of whom wished him well in every way possible. A few women even came up and handed him notes with their name and phone number. He was embarrassed, but he still took them, not wanting to offend anyone. There was no way he could get used to the power of the press and social media. His children, Alan and Marilyn, said how sympathetic the press was to him, while making Tracy and Gary look like villains. What's going on, Vic? It's been 2 years. Your brain is working, but not your heart, Marilyn Siegel said, taking Victor's hand in the expensive restaurant where they were seated. Victor raised his eyes to Marilyn. For the past few years, she and Alan had been his mainstay, as had his daughter Dee. Marilyn, in particular, had made Victor her personal project, often tending to him like a hen. She watched him and waited patiently. He considered giving her a trite answer, but common sense prevailed. Nothing will ever be the same again, Mar, Victor said. I can talk to women, I can get them into bed, but there's nothing. There's no connection. I realize there can be sex without love, but not for me. Vic, there's no connection on the first date, or the second, or the third. Remember when you fell in love with Tracy? You dated her for a long time. You were getting to know each other. It didn't happen overnight. You're wrong to expect the one to just magically appear in front of you. After all, you meet a woman once or twice and then you move on. It doesn't work that way, Marilyn says. But I'm 52, not 22, Mar. I don't have time. Time for love? She interrupted. Jesus, dumbass. It doesn't happen any faster just because you're getting older. And if it's not meant to happen, that's okay too. But you have to try first. Marilyn hummed, then looked questioningly at her friend. She didn't realize it, but she was probably the only person Victor listened to. Coincidentally, Marilyn and Alan had started having small get-togethers at their home every few months and always managed to find a few single women to attend with Victor. Victor wasn't stupid enough not to realize what Marilyn was doing and remarked to Alan that Marilyn had very good taste in women. You better watch it, buddy, because if she ever leaves you, she'll have a whole slew of beautiful women to choose from, Victor said. Don't think I didn't notice that, his friend said. When Victor spotted her, she was reaching up to light one of the 4 mosquito torches from around the edges of the expansive Siegel veranda. Truth be told, he noticed her ass in her tight jeans and the large patch of smooth skin on her back as her top lifted as she reached up. When she turned around, he stood silent, a smile playing on his lips until he realized she was looking right at him. Was all that came out of his confused, stupefied brain? The woman in front of him was probably not an inch taller than 1.5 meters and heavier than 45 kilograms, but half of that weight, Victor noted, was on her breasts. When her arms were lowered along her body, he could see about 7.5 centimeters of toned core muscles beneath her impressive breasts. I get told that a lot, she said confidently. Eh? Vic's brain finally caught up with his ears. He finally looked at the woman's face and realized she was an Asian American woman with large eyes and straight, shoulder-length black hair. She saw recognition finally dawn on his face. Had... I'm kidding, the woman said. You're not the first person to take a long time to realize that I'm Asian. It usually takes a while for men to look me in the face. No, I'm not like that at all, Vic protested, a little too loudly as several people turned toward the couple. She motioned with her hands for him to lower his voice. He blushed profusely. Dr. Vic Washington, he said, extending his hand for a handshake. I'm Al's business partner. I have been for a long time. Yes. Thanks to the news, I know who you are, the woman said, catching Vic's grimace. I'm Lainey Brand, Marilyn's friend mostly. I didn't mean to offend you with my comment about the news. I guess it's about the same for you as it is for guys not to make eye contact with me when they talk to me." "Fair enough," Vic replied. "How about we have a drink, and then I'll talk to you, looking you in the face, and you can pretend like you don't think I'm a pathetic brat made a fool of by my wife in front of the whole country." It was the woman's turn to cluck her tongue as she realized that she must have been as obvious as Vic was as he stared at her large breasts. Okay, she said, giving him a shy smile. They talked for the next hour until Victor realized that he had monopolized the woman. He apologized for his social awkwardness and said he'd let her mingle with the other guests. She, however, told him that she enjoyed his company, after which they separated and began socializing with others, though Victor kept a sneaky eye on her for the rest of the evening. "You know, if you keep looking over your shoulder to follow her, you're going to get a neck ache," Alan told him at one point. "Why don't we switch places so you can look at her over my shoulder? That would be much more comfortable." Yeah, Vic muttered. "I thought I was being so cool, so sneaky." "Just so you know, buddy, drooling isn't cool or sneaky. What do you want to know?" According to Alan, Lainey is 3 years younger than Vic. She's a longtime friend of Marilyn's and works as a reference librarian. Her 20-year marriage broke up when she caught her husband cheating with a coworker. For the past few years, she's been single. "How can a woman with her looks stay single for so long?" Vic asked. "Is she a diva or something? Wow. From what Mar says, she's just a peachy," Alan said. "But she's a picky bitch. Doesn't think it's a good idea to get married a second time, especially if it's to the wrong guy." Got it. Lainey and Vic didn't talk again for the rest of the evening, and she slipped away without giving Vic her phone number. But he wasn't worried because he knew Marilyn had it. Vic waited 2 days before calling Marilyn. He didn't need to tell her why he was calling. "You, sir, have amazing restraint," Marilyn said, instead of starting with the usual pleasantries. "Or you're an idiot." Vic was somewhat taken aback. Marilyn rarely swore and almost never swore. "I was trying to be cool, not look desperate," Victor said. "Did you really greet her with the word, Marilyn scoffed. "Then why would you bother looking cool in front of her? You ruined everything with one little 2-letter word. Or maybe it was the spit." Victor was glad Marilyn couldn't see how much he was blushing. "So are you going to call her right now? Or do you want to spend 2 days discussing the right and wrong way to do it?" Marilyn asked. "You're a master debater, we all know that," Marilyn giggled. "Always a funny joke, Mar," said Vic. "Can you give me her number now?" "Sure, but remember what I told you before about building relationships and not expecting them to come to you," Marilyn said. The very next day, Victor invited Lainey to dinner, and then to a movie the following Friday. He invited her to a very prestigious Russian restaurant, and then let her choose the movie herself. "So you're trying to buy favor with this restaurant?" Lainey asked. "Did Mar tell you that I'm a quarter Russian?" "No. Honestly, I didn't know that," Victor replied. "I just didn't want to take an Asian woman to a Chinese, Japanese, or Korean restaurant." "Well, I'm 3/4 Chinese, but it's from the other quarter that I got this," she said, standing up to her full height and wiggling her breasts gently. "I know. When you think of a Chinese girl, you think of a gymnast, right? And definitely not a size 5. Victor blushed, though he didn't know exactly why. He guessed that he wasn't used to a big-breasted woman talking so openly about her gifts. When he looked up from the table, she was looking directly at him with a slight smirk. "I'm sorry, I can be a little blunt. Didn't Marilyn warn you?" "Actually, no. And even though I'm sure she always makes sure there are a couple of single women at every meeting, she never tells me anything about them. Says I have to do a little work on my own." Lainey laughed merrily. As the relationship progressed, Victor discovered that Lainey has no problem laughing heartily when she's having fun. "That's my girl," Lainey enthused. Vic also learned that Lainey wasn't shy about crying when she was in a mood, such as at the end of a movie she'd chosen. Apparently, her father died of cancer, as did the father of the lead singer in the movie. Victor was unaware of this until Lainey later brought him up to speed when the couple went to a restaurant to order a late dessert and have coffee. Victor waited 2 days before calling Lainey to set up another date. She willingly agreed to the following weekend. At the end of the 5th date, the couple ended up in Victor's bed. About a month later, Marilyn went out to dinner with Laney. It only took 2 minutes of pleasantries before she asked how Laney and Victor's relationship was going. And how could his ex-wife be so stupid? He's handsome, well-built, a gentleman, and a lot of other things, Laney said, a pinkish tint appearing on her face and neck. Hell, he even makes eye contact with me. Well, most of the time, except when I'm wearing this red silk dress. But I'd kill myself if I didn't have at least one man in that dress spending most of the evening looking at my tits. Both women smiled. Dr. Victor Washington could successfully claim he was already married at this point. In reality, however, the wedding did not take place until 6 months later. The announcement in the local newspaper of Dr. Victor Washington's wedding should never have received more than a minor mention, let alone an article as big as the one that appeared in newspapers across the country. The media simply couldn't let the jilted husband wedding pass without a full review of the whole sordid affair. "Damn bastards!" screamed George Barrel over the phone to Arthur Clark, hurling the newspaper across the room. "Every time one of them does anything, there's another jilted husband article in the papers, and then the press starts trotting around again. That cheating whore is still working for you, isn't she?" "Yeah," Clark replied, not realizing where this conversation was going. "Bury the bitch," Barrel hissed. "Send her somewhere the press will never find her." 2 weeks later, a very disgruntled Tracy Washington was running the firm's 2-person office in Paducah, New York. The incessant press coverage made her unemployable anywhere else with a decent salary, and although she was doing okay financially after her divorce, no family or social life to speak of, work was all she had left. What Vic didn't expect was that when he arrived to lead the reception on Monday morning, there would be a note from George Barrel lying in the middle of his desk. The note was sealed, and Vic didn't know who had sent it until he read it. It was an invitation. If you could call it an invitation to ask Barrel to meet the mob boss in his office for lunch that same day at noon. The note said the meeting would be for just the two of them. Vic had never met Barrel in person, but like many people knew of the supposed connection between Barrel and the death of the man who had given him horns. He was perplexed as to why he had been summoned, but he certainly wasn't about to ignore the invitation. After a thorough search, Vic was ushered into Barrel's office by a man-mountain who didn't seem to be having a good day. He was led to a table off to the side, already set up with what appeared to be a sumptuous Italian lunch. Barrel introduced himself, shook the dentist's hand, and invited him to sit down. "It's just us, and this office is bugged daily so we can both speak freely," Barrel said. "I owe you an apology of sorts. As I'm sure you know, I was the one who changed the course of your life. It was a mistake of monumental proportions. I assure you, you were never meant to be affected. Hell, I didn't even know who you were, who your wife is." "Mr. Barrel, if I may interrupt you," Victor said, giving Barrel a bemused smile. "There is no need to apologize to me. In fact, you have done me a great favor." Barrel looked at Victor as if he had grown a second head. Victor paused, took a sip of the 15-year-old Pappy Van Winkle bourbon that Barrel had poured from the shot glass and smiled again. Really awesome," Victor said while Barrel glared at him, waiting for an explanation. "Oh yeah, sorry. So like I said, like I told the cops, I had no idea my bitch of a wife was cheating on me, and you not only warned me about it, but you did what I could only dream of when you killed her lover, eliminated her lover. And getting his nuts shot off was just the perfect cherry on the cake. God, I hope your guy waited a while before he put a second bullet in him. 4.5 months in prison is worth it for him to die. So thank you, and I'm completely sincere. Well, I guess if you don't mind, then I'll stop feeling guilty. Cheers." Both men nodded to each other, finished their shot glasses, and clinked them on the table.
Thanks for hanging out and listening. If you liked the story, hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Make sure to check out our other wild tales right here on the end screen. Catch you in the next story.